Mike Jobbins from Search for Common Ground to start us off.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having us, and thanks for making the space in this august chamber for a conversation with civil society. I know I'm speaking at the end, and we're speaking at the end of a very long and rich day, and don't want to belabor the points that were raised in the earlier panels, but I did want to drive home one point that fundamentally the challenge of violent extremism is not a challenge for governments alone to face. Violent extremism, as we've heard today, is fundamentally a social problem and requires social solutions from civil society, religious leaders, families, and each of us have a role to play. It's not a fight that governments alone can win, and it's this fight that requires the efforts of each and all of us. So what I'd like to do is cite sort of 4 concrete examples and speak to results of the ways that non-state actors can play a constructive and critical role in addressing this, and then just reflect on 2 recommendations about how the governments gathered here can be most useful.
Mike, just before you start with that, could you tell us what Search for Common Ground is?
Fantastic, thanks. I'm so used to being a household name in our own house that I didn't bring it up here. So Search for Common Ground, we're one of the leading conflict transformation organizations. We work in 35 countries around the world. We work on preventing violent extremism of all kinds, from racial extremism, political extremism in the U.S., to questions of ethnic intolerance and extremism across Africa, and issues of religious and ideological extremism around the world. And we, like many of the organizations gathered here, begin from the same understanding that when we talk about young people, we know that children are the last to understand injustice. Young people are the last to accept an injustice. And because we live in a fundamentally unjust world, it's by building on the strengths of children and youth that we can channel energies to ultimately address the most serious problems all of our societies face. And so we put that into application to cite some examples. If we talk about preventing violent extremism, we recognize that the role of the family, the role of the religious community, the role of the people in the environment of young people will play the determining effect, and government can at best play a secondary role. For example, we're working with the government of Niger with its youth outreach and extension officers, and how you approach and how you engage with gangs involved in that control young people's lives in so many of the urban centers across the Sahel, adapting work we've been doing with gangs in Cote d'Ivoire, in Guinea, and across West Africa to the context of violent extremism and the risks that people face in that region. Second, we talk about disengagement. We work quite actively with the prisons in Indonesia, in Morocco, experiences that were shared earlier, recognizing that the reintegration of young people will fall to civil society, it'll fall to families, and it can't begin when a young person exits the prison walls. But civil society and families need to have a role in the carceral environment to contribute to disengagement. Third, if we recognize that the narratives, if young people want to be heroes and they want to change the world, the ways that young people choose to change the world aren't going to be shaped by governments. That's exactly what young people are often trying to change. Narratives of expression for young people have to be shaped by media. They have to have the opportunities to connect to one another in order to create their own narratives. And finally, we recognize, and it was brought up by some of the panelists earlier today, the role that security responses often play in exacerbating the underlying tensions, creating that sense of frustration and injustice. Civil society has a critical role. We work, for example, with the National Human Rights Commission of Nigeria to structure how governments engage with communities so that they don't fundamentally deepen the tensions that are driving the crisis in the first place. And so to end with 2 recommendations. First, where it's very welcome to hear the discourse about a partnership with young people. But when we go back to our offices or when we continue to debate in rooms like this, we have to remember that there's a tendency to talk about young people as beneficiaries, to say youth are uninformed, that they're weak, that they're poor. And the underlying ideology is you're poor, you're weak, you need us. You're our beneficiaries. Whereas extremist groups come and they say, you're strong, you can be a hero, we need you, that's why we're recruiting you. And until we as a global community can understand that each of our societies needs to appreciate every single one of our young people and recognize that they're not beneficiaries, and strike that language and strike that way of thinking from the halls where we make decisions, we'll never get to the solution that we want. And then secondly, we're very appreciative. Many people talked about UNSCR 2250 and glad to see the momentum that's being built. But just like a number of the speakers mentioned earlier, the success of Resolution 1325 was built by women's organizations. It was built by transferring actual resources to actual women-led organizations in actual conflict situations around the world. It was created by giving opportunities for women's organizations to speak out on issues that women faced around the world. And until we create opportunities, systematically create opportunities like the Jordan summit last year, like the summit that the United States organized with us during the General Assembly last year, until we create those actual opportunities and actually transfer resources to youth-led organizations, we won't see the effective implementation of Resolution 2250. And so pushes like the UN Peacebuilding Fund and others to begin transferring those resources are very useful. But we're hoping that as we take this agenda forward, there'll be more opportunities for each and all of us to engage more effectively with young people who are the leaders of today, not just the leaders of tomorrow.